class, the topic of this video is incorporating secondary sources into your essay. This is part of the Explicating Poetry video series. So I created this video in response to a common question I get from students about how to incorporate quotations into their prose in a way that's seamless with their own claims and observations. I would say, first of all, that the difficulty of doing this depends on your mastery of the citation methods I showed you in another video series. But it also depends on where you are in the drafting process. If you're working on a rough draft and you've already selected the citations you wish to use, it's a little easier to incorporate them as you write. But at later stages in the process, and particularly during revision, you may have to fit citations into material that's already written, which could be more challenging for novice writers. And that will be the case here in this video, in which I will incorporate citations from secondary sources into my explication of the final stanza of Elizabeth Bishop's poem, The Man Moth, which you may remember from my earlier Explicating Poetry video series. And here's a screenshot from the end of the second video that shows that explication. So a couple of things that stood out to me here. I remarked in a previous lesson that Elizabeth Bishop's persona throughout the poem comes across as scientific, a scientist or anthropologist, someone who is detached from the subject being described in the poem, the man moth. And I pick up that idea again in this paragraph. So that might be something I look to reinforce with my secondary sources. And then I'm going to look at the last of these three paragraphs. So in this one, I emphasize the shift in the last stanza from that detached scientific observation to some kind of human connection. Here, the poet Bishop, she invites the reader to reach out to the man moth, to try to understand and appreciate him in defiance of the alienating tendencies of city life. And so that's another idea that I might look for some reinforcement from my secondary sources. So to look for something, I'm going to develop some keywords from these ideas, and I came up with these search terms I could use: science, anthropology, empathy, alienation, and urbanism. And these words may not yield a whole lot. I didn't know what I was going to get when I wrote them down and did my search on Galileo. But I'm going to show you the results of that search. This is an earlier iteration of Galileo, but I think you'll be able to understand here. It's not too terribly different from the way it would look today, but you can see that I clicked the full text and scholarly peer-reviewed journals. I clicked both of those search limiters or filters, and you're looking at item 3 and item 4 from those search results. These are the first two items that I honed in on as being perhaps relevant to those interests that I expressed earlier. So the first of these is Elizabeth Bishop driving to the interior, and it was written by a man named Richard Tillinghast, and it appeared in a periodical called The New Criterion in 2009. Fortunately, it is available as a PDF, so I'll be able to read it as it appears in the New Criterion. The next entry is by a woman named Susan McCabe, Survival of the Queerly Fit, Darwin, Marianne Moore, and Elizabeth Bishop. And I, just looking at the title of this article, just the reference to Charles Darwin, I thought, well, there's probably going to be some talk of science in here. I may find something useful for my explication. And this article appeared also in 2009 in 20th Century Literature, obviously a scholarly source. Unfortunately, however, it is not available in PDF. It's only in HTML. And you're going to see when I A little later in this video, I'm going to show you the differences between citing something that's in HTML versus when you have a PDF of the original source. For beginning writers, it's always a good idea to vet your sources, even if they're articles retrieved from academic databases. To build your credibility as a writer, especially as a junior scholar, you want to make sure you're using quality sources. So once you've compiled your secondary sources, spend a little extra time. It doesn't take long learning about the writers, their credentials, their academic affiliations, and so forth, and the publications in which the articles originally appeared. So to find out more, I decided to look up Richard Tillinghast. There's a web page with his sort of professional biography, if you will. It identifies him as a poet, which I found interesting. Certainly that gives him some credibility as a source. I wasn't really familiar with the New Criterion. I didn't know, is that an academic journal? Is that a magazine? I didn't know. So I went to the New Criterion website and read a little bit about it and determined that it was a good quality source. I don't know if it's necessarily a scholarly source, but I think it's a good reliable source. Here is Susan McCabe's website. This is actually the University of Southern California website where I found a biographical sketch of her. She's actually identified in her sketch as an Elizabeth Bishop scholar, which is excellent. So perfect. So clearly she is a reliable source for an explication like this. So here is the Tillinghast article, or part of it, from the New Criterion, and I read through. I was looking for something that would help me remember with that question of human connection and empathy, and I found this passage. Bishop was both unaffected and sophisticated enough to realize that nothing is more natural to us than the feeling that the world responds to us emotionally, that the creatures of fur and feather and leaf are living the same life as we are. That could only be said by a poet, right? I think that's really good. I'd like to use it in my paper. So I'm going to pull that passage aside. And now we're going to look at the Susan McCabe piece. Again, this is an HTML, which I find really difficult to read, but had no choice with this particular article, and I read through looking for something related to science. So this is what I isolated. Bishop offers a naturalist close-up, both precise and estranging. She's actually talking about the man moth in this part of the article, but I really like that line. It's very short. But that phrase, a naturalist close-up, that reinforces what I was saying earlier about the persona of the poem as being scientific. And so I think this quote could be useful in helping to reinforce that point. So I'm going to pull that one too. And now we'll take a look at, I'm going to blow them up a little bit, make them easier to see. We're going to start with the McCabe line. And here is my explication again. I put it into a Word document this time instead of a screenshot from a PowerPoint slide. I'm going to ask you to stop. You can stop the video here if you wish and take a look at the first paragraph and see if you can figure out where you would place that quote. Bishop offers a naturalist close-up, both precise and estranging. Where would you put it in that first paragraph? All right, I'm going to put a little marker. That's where I put it. Thought it fit really nice right there. If you also picked that spot, congratulations. But it could have gone, it could have fit in other places in the paragraph. As I said earlier, incorporating quotations to a late draft can be a little more challenging. The concrete is set and you have to break some loose to create space for the new material. So you also have to think about how you're going to fill in the cracks afterward. Putting the quotation here is going to create some difficulties for me, mainly because of the personal pronouns that come right after. This one, she, and then the pronoun him. These are called personal pronouns. And if I add material before this sentence, The problem is that the reference for these pronouns, the antecedents, the she and the him, might be unclear to my reader. So the antecedent for the she pronoun obviously is Bishop, but remember, I'm going to be quoting Susan McCabe now, so that could get a little tricky. And then the him, of course, refers to the man moth. So just remember the sentence I just flagged. The she recommends examining him, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. So now I'm going to show you the revised paragraph with the McCabe insertion. So first I put in a little transition. Other readers have noted this as well. And then I introduced the quote by identifying my source. In an article about the influence of Charles Darwin on poets Marianne Moore and Elizabeth Bishop, USC professor Susan McCabe observes that in poems like The Man Moth, and then I put in my quote, Bishop offers a naturalist close-up, both precise and estranging. Remember, there's no parenthetical citation with this quotation because my source was in HTML. There are no page numbers. I did not have access to the original paginated journal. So if you look at the sentence that comes right after the quotation, originally it said she recommends examining him, but now I've changed the pronouns she and him to ensure that it's clear that I'm talking about the poem again and not about Susan McCabe and the article. So let's switch now and look at the Tillinghast quotation. I'm going to put it in the third paragraph, remember, where I'm talking about the end of the poem and that move towards some kind of human connection that Bishop describes at the end of the poem. So again, take a moment, pause the video here if you'd like, look at the quote, and think about where you would put it in the third paragraph. So I placed it right here. Again, it could fit in other places potentially, but I thought this is the one that made the most sense, right before the sentence that starts in the last two lines. Now that's going to create a little bit of a problem because I'm going to have a quote now before this, and it may not be clear to the reader, am I talking about the last two lines of the quote or the last two lines of the poem? So let's remember that we need to fix this once we get the quotation in there. So here is my revision. And once again, I introduced the quotation in an article for the New Criterion. And because I didn't know if my readers would know what the New Criterion was, it could be a newspaper, I added a little descriptor there, a magazine devoted to the study of art and literature. Poet Richard Tillinghast remarks on Bishop's emphasis on shared experience and empathic connection. So that's my lead up to the Tillinghast quote. And then I put the quote in. She realizes that nothing is more natural to us than the feeling that the world responds to us emotionally, that the creatures of fur and feather and leaf are living the same life as we are. Now I have a parenthetical citation because remember, the article's in PDF, it's paginated, I know what the page numbers are. But that's a lot of new material that I inserted there. So I went ahead and added a couple of sentences to transition back into talking about the poem. The man moth is another one of these emotional creatures. And then again, I have to clarify I'm talking about the poem again. So instead of just saying in the last two lines, I say in the last two lines of the poem. So now I have incorporated both of those quotations into my explication. And I'm going to show you the original. This is the original. Again, I couldn't double space it, so I apologize if it's hard to read. And then on the right, I'm going to show you the same three paragraphs, but with the additional material highlighted in green. Those are the quotations. And then the revised sentences with my changes highlighted in yellow. So you can see that the paragraphs, this part of the explication increased by, I'd guess, 100, 150 words, something like that. And that concludes this video on incorporating secondary sources into your explication.